On September 19, 1972, in Springfield, New Jersey, a dog returned to its owner with something far more gruesome than a stick in its mouth. To the owner's shock, the animal was carrying around the decomposed remains of a human hand and forearm in its jaws. The man informed the police and, after a short search, they found the remains of the body to which the arm belonged. The remains were that of Jeanette De Palma, a teenager who had been missing for 6 weeks. Not only did they find her decomposed body, but there were strange objects on the ground where it lay. Rumors began to fly that the girl had been sacrificed by a local coven of witches. Others believed that Satanists murdered her for occult ritual purposes. The strangest thing about the murder, however, was the fact that no one wanted to speak about the incident. Even after 30 years, people who lived in the area refused to comment or give their opinions on what they believe happened. Not one person who was interviewed wanted their real name used, and this even included the local police department. People sent in anonymous letters. One of the letters stated that logs had been placed around Jeanette's body and that the writer of it couldn't reveal his name for many reasons which he couldn't reveal either. Another anonymous writer wrote that he or she knew about a coven of witches in the area who were planning to murder a kid over Halloween. The writer was a child at the time and remembered being terrified of going out trick-or-treating for the holiday. Yet another letter stated that the writer's mom knew DePalma and that they were about the same age in 1972. This letter also mentioned animals being murdered and strung up in the trees after the murder took place. In all of the letters, witches or Satanism was mentioned. One of them reiterated that DePalma was a very religious girl who wouldn't get mixed up with satanic practices. However, the writer also mentions that Jeanette De Palma started becoming a little wild as she got older. The murder of Jeanette De Palma was big news for around 2 weeks after her body was found, and then the absolute silence around it started and remained. Her murderer has never been found. In January 1965, two 15-year-old girls were brutally assaulted and murdered on Australia's Wanda beach. Over the next year or so, there were a handful of other attacks on women in the area, but not only have the cases of assault and murder never been concretely linked, they've all gone unsolved. On that day in 1965, teenage friends Christine Schurig and Marianne Schmidt were sexually assaulted, stabbed, and attacked with a blunt object. The murders rocked their community. More than 14,000 people were interviewed during the investigation, but no arrests were ever made. Not that there was a shortage of suspects. Some investigators believed the girls had been killed by one of the most notorious criminals in Australian history, convicted murderer Derek Percy. Another Australian serial killer, Christopher Wilder, was also strongly suspected. Wilder was eventually convicted of kidnapping, murder, and rape in the United States, where he fled after pleading guilty in a Sydney Beach gang rape case in 1962. Today, it seems unlikely that anyone will ever be convicted of the murders, especially now that a key piece of evidence has been lost. Shortly after the murders, male DNA was found on the victims. It was almost certainly from the killer. But when Derek Percy died in 2013 and attempts were made to compare his DNA to the killer's, investigators found that the DNA from the case had vanished from the Gleb forensics lab. On September 12, 2008, a Metrolink commuter train collided head-on with a Union Pacific freight train in the Chatsworth area of Los Angeles. The engineer of the Metrolink train was considered at fault, because it looked like he was sending a text message at the time of the crash. The crash was the worst in the history of the Metrolink. 25 died, and another 135 people were injured. One of the people who lost their lives was 49-year-old Charles Peck, who was in Los Angeles for a job interview with the Van Nuys Airport. Peck wanted to move to California, because his fiancée lived there. He was apparently killed almost instantly, because he was close to the spot of the impact and was one of the last people to be pulled out of the wreckage. What is really mysterious is that, throughout the night and up until his body was discovered, Peck's phone called a number of people, including his sons, his fiancée, and his brother. All the calls were a few seconds of silence before hanging up. It is logical to assume that the phone calls were the result of a technical malfunction and not supernatural forces. But consider this, all 35 calls were made to close family members only, his son, brother, sister, stepmother and fiancé. While nobody's sure how the calls were made, there are some people who believe it was Peck's spirit calling his loved ones to say goodbye. Built during the 13th century, Holy Trinity Church is a medieval landmark in the town of Rothwell, England. However, beneath the church is a charnel chapel containing one of the creepiest sights ever found inside a place of worship, an entire room stacked with human bones. Known as the Bone Crypt, the room is filled with the unidentified skeletal remains of approximately 1,500 individuals. At one point, the room was sealed up, but legend has it that in 1700, a gravedigger working inside the church accidentally fell through the floor. The discovery of the hidden room allegedly drove him insane. The bones were eventually separated and organized onto shelves, and the Bone Crypt has since become a popular tourist attraction in the area. Intriguingly, no one knows the origin of these bones. One prevalent theory is that the remains belong to victims of a plague. Another claims that they were soldiers who were killed during the nearby Battle of Naseby in 1645. It's also possible that many of the individuals were originally buried in the church graveyard but had to be moved to a new location. Sometime during the 16th century, the adjacent Jesus Hospital was built over a burial ground, so the remains might have been dug up and stored in the chapel. Scientists hope to use carbon dating to eventually determine the possible identities of these deceased individuals. Until then, the Bone Crypt remains one of England's most bizarre unsolved mysteries. Discovered in 1886, a mummy with an agonized expression on his face has long since been the object of speculation. This mummy has all his organs intact, which is not customary with mummification. Many interesting theories have arisen, though none have been proven right or wrong. Bob Breyer, a University of Long Island archaeologist, speculated that two parties were responsible for the mummy's agonized expression. One was the murderer, while the other ensured full preservation of the body, possibly due to a personal relationship with the victim. Other researchers and archaeologists have come up with theories ranging from cold-blooded murder to poisoning to being buried alive. A 2008 National Geographic documentary special investigated the possibility that the mummy could be Prince Pentir, son of Pharaoh Ramses III, who was suspected of planning his father's murder. Ancient documents from the 12th century claimed one of Pharaoh Ramses III's wives was tried for conspiring to kill him, due to her desire for Pentir to take over the throne. It is thought that when this plan was discovered, she poisoned Pentir as punishment and rolled him up in sheepskin after being mummified. If that was the case, the scream could have been due to the pain from the poison ingested. However, only a court scan had been done of the screaming mummy, and it remains pure speculation whether the mummy was in fact Prince Pentir. Less sensational theories suggest that the mummy's jaw is open simply because his head most likely rolled back after death occurred. But even that bit of realism is as good a guess as anybody else's.